The Producer is the 13th episode of the 8th season of Full House. This is directed by James O'Keefe, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. So, as usual, I have grouped my thoughts by part of the narrative, but everything comes together later on in the episode, so I will talk about things individually to begin with, and then I will group everything together towards the end. And it's a really enjoyable episode. I think a lot of people, myself included, will be able to relate to Danny. If you are career-oriented, I think there will be some strong relatability there. And even if not, it's still an enjoyable episode. I'll come to Danny in a moment, but first of all, DJ and Stephanie decide to see which of them can go the longest without eating sweets, as they're both convinced the other person will cave first. And whoever eats sweets first will do the other person's chores for a week. I think it's a pretty harmless challenge. Of course, you have to trust that your sibling isn't eating sweets behind your back, but they seem to trust each other, and they also try and sabotage each other. Or certainly DJ tries to sabotage Stephanie, which is cruel, but funny within the episode, and we'll come back to that in a bit. The main narrative focuses on Danny. We know that Danny is very career-driven, and he takes Michelle to work for Bring Your Daughter to Work Day. And Michelle is in awe. She loves seeing what Danny is doing. It's a really fun scene. And then Mr. Strowbridge reveals that he's making Becky the new Wake Up San Francisco producer. And I feel like it would have been nice to ask if that's what she wanted. I mean, there might have been a conversation behind closed doors, but certainly it seemed like this came out of nowhere for Becky. So it would have been nice if she'd been asked rather than told, but nevertheless, this is what's happening. And of course, she's going to jump at this opportunity, as one would expect. And Michelle asks Danny what is a producer. And he explains to Michelle what a producer does. And she says to Danny, "I thought you had a cool job." And then it focuses on Danny, and it's very clear that he is crushed. So he is facing two problems in that moment. The problem of jealousy, because of course he wanted that job. And also the problem that his daughter now thinks that Becky has a cooler job than him. And that's a lot to handle in a very short space of time. And he tries to pretend that everything's fine. He tries to be happy for Becky, and to his credit, he did do a decent job of it, but he eventually had to reveal that yes, he is jealous, and he quits. And it was quite a difficult scene to watch because it was so well done. This takes place 4 hours after Becky found out she was going to be producer. So clearly Danny has had this huge wave of emotions in a very short space of time. And I guess the takeaway there is don't do anything rash. Don't make any sudden decision 4 hours after you find out some information that you're really not happy about. Because clearly it was a terrible decision. It's one he made on impulse, and he is basically not talking to Becky, which is bizarre, because what has Becky done other than accepted an opportunity? Danny thinks that she's shutting down all of his ideas. She shut down one idea, and clearly Danny is just too jealous to really see the reality of the situation. And the guys ask Becky if she's going to try and work things out with Danny. And she said something that I thought was interesting. She said, and I quote, "I think he's just having trouble accepting me as an authority figure." And to be honest, I never really felt that was the case. That wasn't my reading of the situation. I don't think that's the problem. I don't think it's that Danny doesn't want to take orders from Becky. He doesn't want to feel like Becky is in charge. I don't think that's the problem. I think it's the fact that he's not in charge. He's not the producer. So it's not that he has an issue with Becky being producer. He has an issue with the fact that he isn't producer. So I don't think Becky's statement there is quite right, in my opinion. But if anybody else has a different reading, and you do think that actually it's not so much that he's producer, it's more so that Becky is, then let me know. But for me personally, I think it's the other way on. And I think that that's fair. If he was annoyed that Becky was producer and he wasn't, that wouldn't be fair. But the fact that he's annoyed that he isn't, regardless of the fact it's Becky, had it been anybody else, he still would have felt the same way, assuming they were on a pretty level playing field beforehand as he was with Becky. If he felt the same way, then that would be reasonable. But if it was specifically Becky with whom he had the issue, that in itself would be a problem. And I don't read that into the situation. That's not what I feel is the problem. I think it is quite simply, it was something Danny wanted, and because he was on a level playing field with Becky, technically the position could have been his, and it didn't work out that way, and that's why he has a problem. But again, that's my reading of it, so I don't really agree with Becky there, but maybe she has a point. They then all go to a restaurant. Nicky and Alex are having a tantrum, so Jessie takes them out, carries them out in quite a comical fashion, and tells them that they're in the screaming room and they can have their tantrum there. But because they've been given permission to do it, and therefore it wouldn't be being defiant, they realise they don't want to do it. And Jessie talks to them a bit more on their level, and they agree to go back into the restaurant and eat their dinner, and then they can get dessert. What I didn't love about this, well, first of all, DJ and Stephanie decide that the bet is off. They can enjoy their desserts. They won't have to do each other's chores. And I thought that was nice. That was a nice way to conclude things. The sisters uniting, enjoying their dessert. No problems there. But what I didn't like is that Nicky and Alex were still eating their dinner. And everybody else had started on their desserts. And I feel like that's unfair. Just because they're young, it doesn't mean that they can't be part of the dining experience with everybody else. You wouldn't do it as an adult. You wouldn't start your dessert while somebody sitting opposite you is still having their main, unless you were in some crazy rush or something. So I didn't like that. I didn't think that was very good or very mindful of the children at all. So didn't love that moment. Not a great example of how to behave, but nevertheless, everybody's enjoying their desserts now, and then Danny and Becky actually get into a huge argument about everything, and this is where Danny has to admit that he is really jealous. Because before, I guess he had to kind of admit it to himself, but now he has to admit it to everybody else, and that this is what's really happening, and this is why he really quit. And again, I don't think it's the fact that he's jealous of Becky because she doesn't deserve it. It is quite simply because that was an opportunity he could have had. And he also has to realise that if somebody else is going to have it, might as well be Becky. And they make up and everything's fine. And then Michelle reads her 4-line report. And it's about how she loved Danny doing what he did and wishes that she did it again. And I love the fact that she called it What My Daddy Does, or now What My Daddy Did. And it really kind of shows that it's not what you do, it's the fact that you're doing something. Yes, the job may seem cool to Michelle, but for a young child, it's not what you do, it's the fact that you make the effort to do it. And he shows up, he does the job, he works hard, he's committed. That's the important thing. It doesn't matter to Michelle whether he was a showrunner or the presenter or the producer or the executive producer. All Michelle sees is her father being passionate about something, going to work, working hard, aiming for his goals, having a good time for the most part. And that's the important bit. And that's what Michelle needs to see. And I thought that was really lovely. So it's a solid episode. It has a lot to offer. Obviously, if you've ever been jealous of anybody else having something that you have, particularly career related, there is absolutely an element of relatability there. But I think it is important to remember, and again, this is my interpretation, as we see with Danny, it's not so much that somebody else has something, it's that you don't have something. And you can be jealous, but you don't have to treat that person badly, because it's not their fault. Unless they've stolen it from you and they did something sneaky and slimy, in which case, fair enough. But obviously, that's not what's happened here. And ultimately, I'd say the producer is a pretty decent episode of Full House.